Security to the executive floor. Immediately. The urgent call crackled through the Grandview Hotel at 7:23 a.m., but this wasn't about a break-in or a threat. It was about an 8-year-old girl who had just spoken 3 languages in the lobby and somehow saved a $1 million deal that was about to collapse. In 12 hours, her mother would be summoned to the CEO's office, and their lives would never be the same. Let me take you back to where it all began, the moment that would change everything. Grace Miller moved through the Grandview Hotel's opulent lobby like a ghost in uniform, her cleaning cart wheels barely making a sound against polished stone. At 34, she had perfected the art of invisibility in this world of power suits and privilege where conversations flowed in languages she recognized, but dared not speak. This shy girl beside her 8-year-old Lily sat quietly with homework spread like a secret garden of learning. What the wealthy guests didn't know was that this child's 99-cent notebook contained linguistic treasures that would have impressed Harvard professors. Grace watched her daughter's pen move across the page, forming characters in 3 different languages with effortless grace. The sight was both motivational and heartbreaking, this heartwarming scene of a child refusing to let circumstances limit her dreams, creating an inspirational display of quiet determination that no one else seemed to notice. From his security desk, Mr. Harris, a retired language teacher, observed this daily ritual with growing amazement. He alone understood what he was witnessing, genius hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Then came the crisis that would expose everything. Brianna Collins, the CEO's razor-sharp assistant, stood in the lobby's center wielding authority like a weapon, her voice growing desperate as she tried to communicate with Beijing's most powerful hotel investors. Her college-level Mandarin was crumbling under cultural nuances that could cost millions. The Chinese delegation was preparing to leave insulted, frustrated, ready to take their partnership elsewhere. That's when 8-year-old Lily did something that would haunt CEO Logan Price's dreams and change 3 lives forever. She stood up, walked calmly to the group, and spoke in perfect Mandarin with a cultural sensitivity that silenced the entire lobby. Honored guests, please forgive the misunderstanding. Her heart speaks respect even when her words cannot find the proper path. The multi-million-dollar partnership was saved. By a child. By a maid's daughter. By someone the system had trained everyone to ignore. But what Grace didn't know was that someone had been watching from the shadows, and tomorrow morning, that someone would make a phone call that would turn their carefully invisible world completely upside down. The summons came the next morning, at exactly 7:23 a.m. Grace Miller, report to conference room B immediately. Brianna's voice carried the chill of wounded pride and barely contained fury. Grace climbed the service stairs with dread pooling in her stomach. 3 years of careful invisibility had just been shattered by her daughter's moment of brilliance, and she knew that in places like this, brilliance without permission was often punished more severely than incompetence. Brianna paced behind the conference table like a caged predator. Let me be very clear about something, Grace. This hotel is not a playground for your daughter. When important business is being conducted, children, especially staff children, are to remain silent and invisible. Grace's hands trembled as she clasped them behind her back. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't, because next time both of you will be finding new employment. Brianna's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. We have a reputation to maintain, and that doesn't include cleaning ladies' children playing translator. Meanwhile, 2 floors below, Mr. Harris approached Lily, where she sat hunched over her notebook, her earlier confidence replaced by worry. At 67, James Harris had seen enough of life to recognize talent when it whispered in 3 languages, especially in a shy girl who carried wisdom beyond her years. Your mother's in trouble because of what you did up there, isn't she? His voice was gentle, carrying decades of classroom wisdom. Lily nodded without looking up. I just wanted to help. The lady was saying the right words, but with the wrong feelings. Mr. Harris smiled, remembering his own students who had possessed such intuitive understanding. It was heartwarming to see that same spark in this quiet child. Not everyone gets the chance to speak their truth, child. But you already spoke yours. Unknown to either of them, Logan Price sat in his office reviewing security footage for the third time. The camera had captured not just Lily's intervention, but the immediate change in the Chinese delegate's demeanor from formal politeness to genuine warmth. More importantly, it had captured something that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion, the way the elderly delegate had looked at Lily, with the same pride Logan had once seen in his late wife's eyes when she successfully bridged cultural divides. Sarah. The name whispered through his mind like a prayer for forgiveness. His wife had died 3 years ago in a Chinese hospital, victim of the very communication barriers this child had just dissolved with effortless grace. The irony was too painful and too perfect to ignore. Logan closed the laptop and made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow he would do something unprecedented. He would listen to an 8-year-old's wisdom, but would Grace trust a powerful man's sudden interest in her child? The second call came later that same morning, delivered by Mr. Harris himself. Grace, Mr. Price wants to see you in his office at 2 p.m. today. He specifically asked for you to bring Lily. Grace's world tilted on its axis. In 3 years of employment, she had never been summoned to the executive floor, had never had reason to breathe the rarefied air where decisions were made that affected hundreds of lives with the stroke of a pen. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to judgment. Lily pressed close to her mother's side, her usual quiet confidence replaced by nervous energy that made Grace's own anxiety spike higher. Logan Price's office was a study in controlled power, but it was the man himself who surprised Grace. She had expected cold authority, perhaps even cruelty. Instead, she found something that looked almost like curiosity. Sit down, Grace. Lily. His voice was quieter than she had imagined. I watched the security footage from yesterday's incident in the lobby. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. Mr. Price, if this is about... Tell me where your daughter learned to speak Mandarin like a diplomat. The words cut through her apology with surgical precision. The question caught Grace completely off guard. We... YouTube videos mostly. Language learning apps. She's always had an ear for... Grace. Logan's voice carried a weight that stopped her rambling explanation. I've been in international business for 15 years. Yesterday, your 8-year-old daughter did something I've never seen before. She didn't just translate words, she translated intent, culture, respect. How? The honesty in his question unlocked something in Grace that she hadn't accessed in years. The story came out in fragments: her partial linguistics degree at Columbia, the scholarship she'd lost when she got pregnant, the family who had cut her off for choosing to keep the baby, the marriage that had promised salvation, but delivered only isolation and debt. Logan listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he turned to Lily, who had been sitting quietly, absorbing every word. Lily, can you tell me what you heard in that conversation yesterday that the adults missed? Lily considered the question with the seriousness of someone far older than her 8 years. The Chinese gentlemen weren't angry about the words, Mr. Price. They were sad about the feeling behind the words. In Chinese culture, respect isn't just what you say, it's how your heart feels when you say it. Logan leaned forward, struck by the simplicity and profound truth of her observation. And you could hear their hearts. Sometimes when people speak a language that isn't their birth language, their feelings get lost between their heart and their mouth. Lily explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. I can help them find the path back. Her transformation from quiet observer to confident communicator was nothing short of inspirational. The silence that followed was filled with possibility and danger in equal measure. Logan made a decision that would either transform their lives or destroy them. Motivated by something deeply motivational about this child's authentic wisdom. I want to offer you both something, he said slowly. There's a follow-up meeting with the Beijing delegation next week. I want Lily there. Not as a curiosity, not as a child playing dress-up, but as a legitimate part of our team. Grace felt the familiar pull of possibility warring with hard-learned lessons of disappointment. She's 8 years old, Mr. Price. She's 8 years old, and she solved a $1 million communication problem in 30 seconds. Logan's voice carried a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying. Grace, I've built my career on recognizing talent. Your daughter doesn't just have a gift, she has a calling. But accepting this offer would make them targets. Who else was watching? The whispers started before Grace's shift ended. By morning, every member of the hotel staff knew about the CEO's unprecedented interest in the cleaning lady's daughter. But it wasn't gossip that spread through the corridors, it was poison carefully crafted and strategically deployed. Brianna Collins had spent the night orchestrating a campaign with surgical precision. Nothing could be traced back to her directly, but suddenly the internal communications buzzed with speculation. CEO shows favoritism to Maid's daughter, child exploitation disguised as opportunity. The leaked emails painted a picture of inappropriate charity, suggesting that Logan's judgment was compromised by misplaced sympathy. Grace arrived at work to find herself assigned to the most demanding shifts, her access to common areas mysteriously restricted, her work scrutinized for flaws that had never mattered before. The message was clear: know your place or lose it entirely. But it was the effect on Lily that broke Grace's heart. Her bright, curious daughter began to withdraw, speaking less, observing more, as if she could feel the weight of adult judgment pressing down on her small shoulders. The breaking point came during the staff cafeteria's lunch hour. Grace sat with Lily at their usual corner table when she overheard the conversation from the next table, a deliberately loud discussion about staff children who don't know their place, and attention-seeking behavior that disrupts professional environments. Lily's sandwich remained untouched. Her notebook, the treasured composition book filled with linguistic discoveries, remained closed, hidden away like a guilty secret. "Mama," Lily said quietly, her voice barely audible above the cafeteria noise. "Did I make everything bad for you?" Grace felt something shatter inside her chest. "No, sweetheart. You did something extraordinary, and sometimes when you do something extraordinary, it makes people uncomfortable. Because they can't do it too, because they're afraid it makes them less special." That afternoon, Grace found an unexpected ally. Mr. Harris approached her during her break, his weathered hands carrying 2 cups of coffee and a lifetime of understanding. "They're trying to make her disappear, aren't they?" he said without preamble, settling into the chair across from her. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "I taught languages for 37 years before I took this job." Mr. Harris continued, his voice carrying the weight of remembered classrooms and gifted students. "I've seen what happens when talent gets crushed by fear. But I've also seen what happens when it's protected by people who understand its value." The next morning brought the most devastating development yet. Lily, who had always greeted each day with quiet enthusiasm for learning, sat at her usual spot near Grace's cart. and refused to speak. Not in English, not in Mandarin, not in Spanish, not at all. The sight of this once vibrant, shy girl retreating into silence was devastating, yet somehow her quiet dignity remained heartwarming. When Grace knelt beside her daughter, worried Lily finally whispered, "If my talking makes you sad, Mama, then I won't talk anymore." The words hit Grace like a physical blow, yet they also revealed something profoundly inspirational about her daughter's character, even in pain. Lily's first instinct was to protect her mother. Her brilliant, gifted daughter was willing to silence her own voice to protect her mother from the consequences of her talent. In that moment, Grace realized that their greatest enemy wasn't Brianna's sabotage or the staff's resentment. It was the lesson she had unknowingly taught her daughter, that being extraordinary was dangerous. But someone unexpected was about to change everything. The revelation came during the hotel's monthly VIP appreciation dinner, an elegant affair where longtime guests mingled with management in the hotel's grand ballroom. Grace was working the event invisible as always, while Lily sat quietly at a corner table, her newfound silence more deafening than any words could have been. Mrs. Elaine Turner, 71 years old, with silver hair and sharp eyes, had been watching the evening's dynamics with the attention of someone accustomed to reading subtleties that others missed. As a longtime guest, she commanded respect. As a woman who had spent 37 years translating for the United Nations, she understood the delicate dance of language and power better than anyone in the room. When the conversation at the main table turned to the recent disruption caused by staff children, Mrs. Turner set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. "Forgive me," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "But I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what constituted disruption this week." The table fell silent. Logan Price, who had been participating in the conversation with mounting discomfort, turned his full attention to the elderly woman. Mrs. Turner continued in flawless Mandarin, directing her words to the Chinese delegates who had remained for the dinner. Speaking in their native language, she said, "I witnessed the incident in question. The child's intervention was not disruption, it was diplomacy at its finest." The elderly delegate, Mr. Chen, nodded respectfully and replied in Mandarin, "Mrs. Turner speaks truth. The young translator showed us respect that we had not felt since our arrival." Mrs. Turner stood her small frame, somehow commanding the attention of everyone in the ballroom. She walked deliberately to where Lily sat, placing a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. Her words would prove to be deeply motivational for everyone who heard them. "This child," she said, switching back to English, "possesses something that cannot be taught in any business school, the ability to hear not just words, but the hearts behind them." She looked directly at Logan, her eyes holding decades of wisdom and something that might have been challenge. "I've seen talents like hers exactly 3 times in my career. Each time the question wasn't whether the gift was real, it was whether the adults around them were brave enough to nurture it." The ballroom had grown completely still. Grace felt tears prick her eyes as she watched this stranger defend her daughter with more conviction than she had mustered herself. "But perhaps," Mrs. Turner continued, her voice taking on a sharper edge, "we're more comfortable with mediocrity that knows its place than with excellence that dares to speak up." Brianna's face had gone pale, but she managed to maintain her professional smile. "Mrs. Turner, I think there's been some confusion about appropriate professional boundaries." "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Turner interrupted, her tone deceptively sweet. "I've spent 4 decades navigating professional boundaries in rooms where the wrong word could start wars. I know exactly what I witnessed." She turned back to Logan, her voice softer but no less pointed. "Don't let fear of change blind you to the gift sitting right in front of you. Some opportunities don't come twice." Logan felt something shift inside his chest, the same recognition he had experienced watching the security footage, but sharper now, more urgent. For the first time since Sarah's death, he was being asked to choose hope over self-protection. Mr. Harris, who had been serving at the event, caught Grace's eye from across the room and nodded almost imperceptibly. The look they shared held understanding. They both knew that this moment was the fulcrum on which everything would turn. Lily, who had been listening to every word with the intensity that had always marked her as different, finally looked up at Mrs. Turner and whispered, "Thank you for hearing me even when I wasn't speaking." Mrs. Turner smiled, the expression transforming her austere features. "My dear child, true communication happens as much in the silences as in the words. Never let anyone convince you that your voice doesn't matter." The final battle was about to begin, but would anyone be strong enough to win it? The critical meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on Thursday, a final negotiation session that would determine the future of the Grandview Hotel's expansion into the Asian market. Grace arrived that morning to find an unexpected message waiting. She and Lily were to report to Conference Room A immediately. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy. Logan sat at the head of the table, flanked by his executive team and the Chinese delegation Grace recognized from that first encounter. But it was Mrs. Turner's presence that surprised her most. The elderly woman sat quietly in a chair near the window, her keen eyes taking in every nuance of the room's dynamics. Logan gestured for Grace and Lily to sit near the middle of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Lily Miller, our cultural liaison for this project." The title hung in the air like a challenge. Several executives exchanged glances. Brianna's smile never wavered, but her knuckles went white where they gripped her pen. Mr. Chen leaned forward with genuine warmth. "Miss Lily, we are honored to see you again." Lily stood and bowed properly, then responded in flawless Mandarin, though to English speakers. She said, "The honor is mine, Mr. Chen. I hope today we can build bridges strong enough to last many generations." What followed was a masterclass in cultural sensitivity disguised as an 8-year-old's conversation. The negotiations had stalled on a seemingly simple point: the hotel's proposed staff training programs for cultural awareness. The American side viewed it as a minor procedural requirement. The Chinese delegation saw it as fundamental to their partnership's success. Lily listened to both sides present their positions, her dark eyes moving between speakers with the intensity that had always marked her as different. When Logan finally looked at her with a slight nod, a gesture of trust that would later be remembered by everyone in the room, she stood up. The transformation of this formerly shy girl into a confident diplomat was nothing short of inspirational. "Mr. Chen," she said, switching to Mandarin, "I understand that you believe respect must be learned before it can be given. That true partnership requires understanding not just business practices, but heart practices." She turned to Logan and the American team, continuing in English. "And I understand that you want to show commitment to success through measurable actions, not just beautiful words." The room had grown completely silent. Grace felt her heart hammering as she watched her daughter navigate waters that had stymied seasoned diplomats. Maybe. Lily continued, switching effortlessly between languages to ensure both sides heard her words in their native tongue. "The training program isn't about teaching Americans to be Chinese or Chinese to be American. Maybe it's about teaching everyone to listen for the music behind the words." She paused, looking around the room with the calm confidence that had emerged from her weeks of enforced silence. "In my mama's language studies, she learned that every culture has a different way of saying, 'I respect you.' But respect itself, the feeling sounds the same in every heart." Mr. Chen exchanged glances with his colleagues, then smiled broadly and said in Mandarin, "Miss Lily, you have just described what we have been trying to say for weeks. We don't want our American partners to become Chinese, we want them to become themselves, but with ears that can hear our way of showing care. The moment that would later be recounted in business schools and cultural studies programs came when Mr. Chen asked, "Mr. Price, this remarkable young diplomat, who is she?" Logan stood his voice, carrying a conviction that surprised even himself. "She is the daughter of the most talented linguist I have ever encountered, and the person I should have hired 3 years ago instead of overlooking because of her circumstances." The words rang through the conference room like a bell. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes as she realized what Logan had just done. He hadn't just defended Lily's presence, he had acknowledged Grace's worth in front of the very people who had dismissed them both. "If this partnership moves forward," Logan continued, "it will be because of the cultural bridge-building program that Grace Miller will design and her daughter will help implement. We're not just signing a business contract today, we're creating a new model for international cooperation." Mr. Chen stood and bowed deeply to both Grace and Lily and said in his native Chinese, "Then we are not just business partners, but family partners. In Chinese culture, when someone helps you build a bridge to your dreams, they become part of those dreams forever." Victory was sweet, but would their enemies accept defeat? The announcements came in rapid succession over the following week, each one reshaping the landscape of power within the Grandview Hotel like dominoes falling in precisely calculated sequence. First, Logan Price formally announced the creation of the Lily Bridge Program, a comprehensive initiative to train young cultural interpreters and provide advanced language education to underprivileged children. The program would be headquartered at the Grandview Hotel with Grace Miller as its director and Lily as its first scholarship recipient. Second, Grace Miller was promoted from housekeeping to program director with an office on the 32nd floor and a salary that transformed her life from survival to possibility. Third, Brianna Collins was reassigned to the company's Denver location, effective immediately. Her attempts to undermine the program and leak confidential information to competitors had been discovered through routine security monitoring. The reassignment was presented as a lateral move, but everyone understood the true message: there were consequences for those who mistook cruelty for strength. Grace watched Brianna pack her office with a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been pity. The woman who had wielded power like a sword had fallen victim to her own inability to see value in unexpected places. "You think you've won?" Brianna said quietly as she carried her final box to the elevator. "But this isn't sustainable. He'll lose interest, the program will fail, and you'll be right back where you started, except now everyone will know you reached above your station." Grace met her gaze without flinching. "Maybe, but Lily will know she tried. And maybe that's enough." The months that followed proved Grace's faith justified in ways she couldn't have imagined. The Lily Bridge program attracted attention from international education organizations, major corporations, seeking cultural consultants, and families around the world who recognized their own children's untapped potential. Lily herself blossomed under the attention and resources, her gifts expanding beyond language into genuine cultural diplomacy. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation happened in the quiet moments when Logan would stop by the program offices to check on their progress, his face lighting up in ways that reminded Grace of her own joy in watching Lily grow. When Mr. Harris enrolled his grandson in the program, finally seeing his own teaching legacy continue. When other hotel employees began asking if their children could participate, suddenly seeing opportunity where they had once seen only ordinary work. These heartwarming connections proved deeply motivational for everyone involved. The program's first graduation ceremony took place in the hotel's grand ballroom, the same room where Mrs. Turner had defended Lily's worth. 12 children from diverse backgrounds stood on the small stage, each one fluent in at least 2 languages and trained in cultural communication that went far beyond mere translation. Grace watched from the audience as Lily, now 9 years old and glowing with confidence, served as the ceremony's master of ceremonies. Her daughter introduced each graduate in their native language, then shared their stories in English, building bridges between families who had never imagined their children's gifts could be seen as valuable. When the ceremony concluded, Mrs. Turner approached Grace with a smile that held both pride and something deeper. "I have a confession to make, my dear. I wasn't at that dinner by accident. Logan called me the day after your daughter's first intervention. He wanted my professional assessment of what he had witnessed." Grace felt the pieces clicking into place. "You've been watching out for us all along. I've been watching for the same thing Logan has been searching for since his wife died, proof that understanding can bridge any divide if we're brave enough to build the bridge." Mrs. Turner's eyes held the weight of decades spent facilitating impossible conversations. "Your daughter is that proof, Grace. And you're the reason she'll be able to use her gifts to heal the world instead of being crushed by it." But the greatest moment was still to come. 1 year after that first whispered phrase in Mandarin, Lily Miller stood on a stage at the United Nations Children's Fund headquarters, addressing an audience of diplomats, educators, and parents in 3 languages, but more importantly, in the universal language of hope. Grace watched from the audience as her 10-year-old daughter spoke about the power of understanding the bridges built by listening and the magic that happens when we see potential instead of limitations. The little girl who had once sat silently in hotel corners had become a voice for countless other children whose gifts had been overlooked because they came wrapped in unexpected packages. In the front row, Logan Price sat beside Mrs. Turner, both of them glowing with the particular pride that comes from watching someone you believed in exceed even your highest expectations. Scattered throughout the audience were dozens of other children from the Lily Bridge program, their faces bright with the knowledge that they too possessed gifts worth sharing with the world. As Lily concluded her speech, she switched to her mother's favorite language, the language of the heart. "My mama taught me that every person carries inside them a light that can help others find their way. Sometimes we're afraid to let that light shine because we think it makes us different. But being different isn't something to hide, it's something to celebrate." She paused, looking directly at Grace with eyes that held both the innocence of childhood and the wisdom of someone who had learned to transform pain into purpose. "The most important lesson I've learned is that bridges aren't built by one person standing on one side. They're built when people on both sides decide to meet in the middle." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Grace barely heard it. She was remembering the scared young woman who had cleaned hotel rooms while her daughter did homework in corners, both of them invisible to a world that measured worth by position rather than potential. After the ceremony, as families and children mingled in the reception hall, Mr. Harris approached Grace with a smile that held decades of classroom satisfaction. At 78, he had found new purpose helping to train the program's young interpreters, his teaching skills finally paired with students who could match his passion for linguistic beauty. "You know," he said quietly, "in all my years of teaching, I always wondered if I was really making a difference. But watching your daughter today, seeing what she's built from that first moment of courage in the hotel lobby, I finally know the answer." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "What answer is that, Mr. Harris?" "That I was teaching exactly the right people all along. I just didn't know it yet." As the evening wound down, Grace found herself standing beside Logan on the organization's outdoor terrace, both of them watching Lily explain the intricacies of cultural translation to a group of fascinated adults. The scene had a dreamlike quality, too perfect, too improbable to be real. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she hadn't spoken up that day?" Logan asked quietly. Grace considered the question, thinking of all the paths not taken, all the voices that remained silent. "I think she would have found another way. Children like Lily, they're not meant to stay hidden forever." Logan nodded, his expression holding the peace that comes from finally finding purpose after years of searching. "Sarah would have loved her, you know. She always said that the best translators don't just change words, they change hearts. They change worlds," Grace corrected gently, watching her daughter gesture animatedly as she built yet another bridge between strangers who were discovering they weren't so different after all. 6 months later, the first Lily Bridge International Conference convened in the Grandview Hotel's ballroom, bringing together young cultural ambassadors from 23 countries. As Grace stood at the back of the room, watching children who had been overlooked and underestimated share their gifts with the world, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with one little girl brave enough to speak up when adults had fallen silent. It had grown through the courage of people willing to see potential instead of position, value instead of status. And it had flourished, because sometimes when the light shines brightly enough, it reveals that the most extraordinary magic was hidden in the most ordinary places all along. Harris, now the program's senior cultural advisor, stood beside Grace with eyes bright with unshed tears of pride. As Lily took the stage to welcome delegates from around the world, he whispered the words that would echo in Grace's heart forever. "I always knew I was teaching the right person. I just never imagined she would teach the whole world."